Hi everyone. Today we're going to continue looking at the ideologies that underpin our approach to work health and safety, and we'll particularly examine this idea of blame the system. We'll also explore the concept of culture itself, values, attitudes, beliefs, and how they shape health and safety outcomes. We'll consider whether collective mindfulness is a helpful concept for explaining culture. We will look at the four elements of reasons safety culture model or elements of culture, and note that that's covered in chapter 17 of our textbook. One thing I hope students would be able to do is to explain why an emphasis on individual frontline worker behaviour is limited in terms of the outcomes for work health and safety. We really need a systems approach to improve health and safety outcomes. Now, safety culture, we might think, well, it's about what people think. But yes, individuals are part of that, but particular individuals we need to focus on are top management, because it's top management that influence the way organisations run, that provide resources, that set the direction and the tone for organisations. What's valued in an organisation really is shaped by what top management value in an organisation. So I've got a few examples and scenarios and ways of thinking about these issues to help you appreciate what I'm trying to explain to you. And this is all very important for your essay due in week 6. Right, linking back to week 3, we accept that blaming the victim is a perfectly common sense attitude to take for work health and safety. And an ideology, it's a set of ideas that underpin social practice, and it's common sense to focus on the one injured person rather than everyone who's well. That's a common sense idea, but that's part of blame the victim ideology, and really a better approach is to focus on hazard at work rather than the individual who is injured. So we argue for a blame the system ideology, a focus on system. And a key element of that ideology is accepting that if we create an organisation, that organisation will present social and technological risks, so that the social and technological systems that are organisations will have risks to workers and others. Now, if you create an organisation, you put people at risk, you have to embrace being responsible for those risks and managing for those risks. It's just part of running a business. Now, this ideology of if organisations are created, they put people at risk, therefore those risks have to be managed. Some people think that that's a little unfair, because individual human workers and people can act in rather idiosyncratic ways or unhelpful ways. And I'm sympathetic to managers who go, oh, hang on, we tried everything, we did this, we did that, and that person really acted in a very unpredictable way. It is a challenge, and it's a tough ask for management to have to embrace responsibility for the vagaries of humanity. On Views this week, you'll see a clip where a couple of young people, it's for a railway crossing, and they just ignore the flashing lights, the automatic gates that are set up to be barriers. They're climbing over barriers that are there to keep them safe, and one of them's almost killed by a train. Now trying to say to Sydney Trains and to line managers in that part of the railway system, you're responsible. If one of those people got killed, you're responsible. What we're actually saying with this blame the system approach is really that humans are fallible, and managers do have to consider how they manage for behaviour that they might think is completely unreasonable. Also, with our icebreaker this week, there were some clips about driving a forklift. Hopefully you had a look at those. And you're looking at these people driving a forklift and thinking, these workers, what were you thinking? Can't you see that you can't fit through there? Why? Like you can see an element of why a manager might turn around and say, hang on, that individual worker has been negligent or skylarking and have put themselves in danger, but also, damaged equipment, damaged plant, put others in danger as well. What about a blame the system approach? Now, this example here is where, unfortunately, a worker was killed, was thrown from the forklift, the handbrake wasn't working. And the very sad thing about this was that the worker had actually reported that the forklift had faulty brakes. So there was the worker had done the right thing, and unfortunately was still killed by the forklift he was driving. Also, the seatbelt, the vehicle didn't have a seatbelt, and there was no formal training for this driver. Now, this to me is really obvious. Of course, blame the system approach, that the organisation hadn't taken a systematic approach to managing the risks around forklifts. What about this one here, though? This idea of what about this worker? This was a case where the worker did something he was not meant to do. All right, he manually repositioned some equipment that was too heavy, and he's damaged his shoulder. He's had to go through surgery, and of course you throw off one part of the body, the rest of the body as a system can be thrown out. And this was an interesting case because the employer said, look, this is not our responsibility. This worker acted, against direction. Now, the worker himself and witnesses in the workplace actually said, well, hang on. We're actually under a lot of pressure to work quickly. It was common practice to do what this worker did. It was sort of this workaround for a problem that occurred often. And they're under pressure to work fast. This brings us back to James Reason's theory. James Reason has written books called, Human Error at Work. And he talks also about heroic recoveries and an individual will act to prevent a disaster. And James Reason says that of course errors, human error, pilot error, errors are part of work health safety losses, adverse events. Of course they are. But he says a systems approach is where you accept that humans will make errors. A systems approach is that you design your system for fallible humans, not perfect humans, but fallible humans. He extends his analysis of errors and argues that you can explain errors. They're not out of the blue. They're not unforeseeable. They're not uncommon. They're not accidents. Errors are consequences of the workplaces people are in, the hazards that surround them, the leadership that they have or lack of supervision. In this case, the forklift driver wasn't trained. So yes, you could point at that error, that worker did something he was not meant to do. But Reason says focusing on human behaviour at that level will not improve work health and safety, and he argues for a systems approach. Errors are consequences. Right, so moving forward, we're going to add culture to it. So we're thinking about our ideology. We're having a blame the system approach. Always look beyond human behaviour to the work health safety management system and think about organisations as systems. And that's our ideological focus. An outcome of adopting that ideological focus is that one will embrace the need for a risk management system. I'm going to add to this a little bit before we've even really talked about risk management systems, but you've read about it in chapter 6 of your textbook. We're going to add to this idea of needing a management system with this idea of culture. Systems aren't enough. Systems are not enough. We also need to address culture. And before we can talk about safety culture and its role in work health safety management, we need to slow down a little bit and just explore conceptually this concept of culture. Now, the word culture is used in everyday life. Yogurt has culture, doesn't it? It's an organic metaphor, and it's used widely in studying organisations. It's used widely for studying groups of people, even nation states. We talk about a national culture. We talk about cultural differences between people. So it's used a lot. So we do need to focus and study what it means in the sense of safety culture. One of the difficult things about culture as a concept is that it is more than one thing. It's a medium and outcome of social action. All right. So culture is a duality in the sense that culture is something that we use to go about our daily lives as individuals, when we interact with others, when we interact with institutions, when we interact even with technology. We require a shared culture for that. And we had to have some sort of mutual understanding to start from. to work with others, to work with technology, to work with institutions. Nothing comes from nothing. You've got to start from something. So we use culture as this sort of shorthand expression for all of those things that we need to know and to do to communicate and interact with others. So it's a medium, a means through which we get something done. Language is a huge part of it. Symbols are a part of it. Basic example. One thing I'm lacking or I struggle with in online teaching is I can't smile at students. A smile from a tutor is a symbol that students are on the right track. It's a symbol to encourage students and to indicate that people are welcome. So that, in that sense, a smile is, in the UWS context, is a symbol. It's part of our culture. In some other cultures, a smile can indicate embarrassment, something quite different. So, yes, we need that sort of knowledge of what a smile from a tutor means at UWS for its meaning to be actualised. And that's a cultural understanding. Now, culture is also an outcome of social action. This idea of tutors smiling at students, because it's happened in the past and had a particular meaning and that's been repeated and repeated, our behaviour, tutors interacting with students, our behaviour has created the UWS culture. So we have these shared understandings, and as we reproduce through our practice the interpretation and meaning of symbols and artefacts, ways of doing things, as we reproduce that in practice, it turns into culture. It's inherently unstable, changeable. If tutors started acting in different ways and that behaviour started to be replicated through UWS, then we'd have a different culture of UWS. Right? So a medium and outcome of social action. This is a very big social science idea. We talked about this blame the individual, and we have to recognise and accept that there's some cultural reasons for doing that and some political reasons, stakeholder interests for doing that. One ideological reason is that individual errors are easier to see and to prove. You were standing right there. You could see a forklift driver doing the wrong thing, but it might be very difficult to see that the forklift driver did the wrong thing because he was under pressure from supervisors to maintain a fast pace of production. That's hard to see. That's a very difficult thing to see. There's also been evidence and arguments that name, blame and shame is good because we want to take revenge on something that's happened, someone who's done something that makes life difficult for us. Also, if we find one person to blame, one person to scapegoat, the responsibility for others to act and to change is alleviated. Everyone loves a scapegoat. Also, if we identify a particular individual to blame, it means that the organisation's not responsible, management's not responsible, the supplier, designer of equipment is not responsible. We've found the guilty party. There's also a very strong tradition of name, blame, shame and punish. When things go wrong in Western societies, it's a sign for who do we blame, who's going to be liable, rather than everyone pulling together to solve problems and do things better. Also, our Western approach to things, it's built into our legal system. So our traditions of wanting to identify someone to be blamed, and we've created a legal system that reproduces that culture of liability and blame. And we have an adversarial approach. So going back to this forklift driver who did the wrong thing, the only reason we know about this case is that the employer defended being prosecuted for a breach in their health and safety management system. Their defence in the prosecution was, well, we didn't tell that worker to do the wrong thing. The worker did the wrong thing. So they're trying to blame the worker and avoid liability. So our legal system does encourage a lot of finger pointing. He said, she said, not us. Now, for safety culture theorists, work health safety specialists, this idea, this culture of blaming is really very unhelpful. And we want people to have different mindsets, different ideologies. blaming or being, fear of being blamed can lead to some very counterproductive behaviours around health and safety that will do nothing towards identifying hazards and managing the risks of those hazards. When people are fearful, they tend to hide the errors, they avoid responsibility and pass the blame onto someone else rather than thinking about what can I do here to make things better. Also, people might avoid doing risky tasks. Something might go wrong, so I won't do it rather than have a go at something. People also will tend to fight and argue and blame rather than cooperate and share and solve problems together. And all those sort of negative behaviours will actually prevent meaningful analysis and coming up with lasting solutions to particular problems. Now, outsiders from a workplace, there's a whole range of stakeholders who can contribute to work health and safety. If an organisation or individuals in an organisation tend to cover things up, hide things, then other stakeholders can't make that contribution to make things better. And if, will you bring in work cover to get advice on a problem? Will you consult with union representatives? Will you allow workers to be represented by unions on health and safety issues? Are you going to let the daylight in, let the sunshine in to really have scrutiny of how you're managing health and safety? Right, I'll leave it there, and I'm going to talk about the BP Texas City disaster in part B of the presentation.